Hey everyone, we are talking bees, the alchemistry of bees. We're going to just jump right in. The beekeeping industry is primarily for honeybees and agricultural pollination, specifically with like almond orchards. Can you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely a big question.
Yeah.
A lot of my work, I started beekeeping just over 10 years ago, here in Colorado. So when I was first getting started with beekeeping was, kind of confused at the
Hmm.
beekeeping industry itself. Something just didn't sit right in my being. And after studying it longer and being more involved in it, the last decade, as well as the tending of bees,
Hmm.
I think it's first important for people to understand that the style of beekeeping that most of us are exposed to today, the dominant paradigm of beekeeping, isn't really that old in comparison to the history of bee tending across the world throughout time.
Hmm.
And that style of beekeeping is heavily influenced by industrialization. And, beekeeping here in the United States particularly started to shift in about like the 1950s, a lot more majorly, as the United States, as just industrialization was taking a stronger hold and
Hmm.
on agriculture as well. And so you had people moving, from small farms into cities, and a lot of things shifted, and beekeeping shifted with that. And so you had beekeepers being incentivized by the government to not only produce honey but also start being involved in commercial pollination.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's an interesting place that we're in.
Sure.
And yeah.
And one of the like big concerns that I've heard about is like, hey, honey production has gone way up, but bees are dying in mass. And when I think about the almond industry, not to like fearmonger or anything like that, but the reality is like the amount of pesticides and herbicides used in these big giant monoculture orchards is a
Mhm.
lot. And then bees are super duper sensitive to pretty much everything. We have crop
Yeah.
dusting that happens in my area, and my
Mhm.
understanding is from talking to local beekeepers, they will be asked to be informed when the crop dusting is going to happen, so that they can put their bees and make sure they're inside their hive.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's there's so many issues. And
Mm-hmm.
when we look at particularly the declining bees, it's important to first differentiate native bees from also honeybees, and understanding that the issue with honeybees and colony collapse disorder, as they formally call it, is rooted in agricultural practices, and
Mm-hmm.
the understanding that honeybees, uh, a large majority of them, here in the United States, are managed by humans. And an even larger majority of that are managed commercially
Mm-hmm.
and involved in industrial agriculture. And then you have, hobbyists and smaller scale beekeepers like myself. And then we have our honeybees that are living unmanaged
Sure.
and wild, feral. And a lot of my work has been in listening to those bees and how are they doing? How are the bees doing that aren't being managed by humans? And what we're
Mm-hmm.
finding, what is being found is they're doing a lot better. You know, honeybees, wild honeybees they're having survival rates of over 80%.
Wow.
And, what we just saw in, managed colonies here in the United States was 70% losses. So these are things that we need to be looking at. But it's not it's like in my work, it's, I keep bees in the way that I do, in
Mm-hmm.
a small scale, very reverent way, and I'm really trying to find roots, like really looking at this holistically.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things you said when we met last year was,
Mhm.
you let your bees swarm, and you have a tendency to also let them live in a more natural environment rather than these like
Mhm.
stacked boxes that are pretty well managed, where you're sugar dripping the water or sugar watering them, and because you're stealing their honey away. Tell us a little bit more about the like wild bees and how you tend them in a more reverent way.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, I think turning to so I started to follow the work of Thomas Seeley some years ago, and he is a biologist. He's not a beekeeper. So I think that that's also, interesting when we're looking at. I try and work with bees in a bee-centric way,
Mm-hmm.
right? And looking at how to create a system of beekeeping that really puts their needs above our own. And so Thomas Seeley, yeah, he's a biologist in upstate New York, and he's been studying wild or feral honeybee colonies for decades. And he's the one finding those numbers, and also, yeah, just looking at the trees and like natural nesting habitats for honeybees, and the commercial style of beekeeping is definitely a breeding ground for disease and
Mm-hmm.
stress, and but it's also, you know so one of the biggest things that honeybees are up against right now is a parasitic mite called the
Mm-hmm.
varroa mite. And I think it's important to discuss this because I think this is like a really big place of division within beekeeping. And I think one of my biggest frustrations within beekeeping is, when people just become really stuck in their ways and they're not open minded to really listening to what's
Yeah,
happening.
dogma really just shatters.
Yeah,
It
and
doesn't work.
it's really unfortunate. And yeah, like the questions that I've been sitting with are big, and it requires a massive
Mm-hmm.
reformation of our entire agricultural system, our entire society, and also our culture. Like it
Yeah.
requires a cultural transformation. And so these are when you really look at what needs to be done, it is like a lot, and a lot of people aren't willing to make those changes. And so it's like, how do you find an integrated approach? And I do believe I'm seeing that happen. And I think it can happen where we can, not just fully, I'm not asking everyone to fully keep their bees and trees in like this fully well way.
Sure.
And so I want to like be clear there, I'm calling for also an integrated approach, and how can, these more commercial style beekeepers at least start to integrate some of these more natural practices.
Yeah.
And looking at, one of the things that I've been really passionate about is, protecting the reproductive process of honeybees, because
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things that Rudolf Steiner actually warned about in his
Mm-hmm.
7 bee lectures back in like the 1920s.
Mm-hmm.
And he was speaking to a lot of what was going to happen to the honeybees. And I think what he was also speaking to, which was something that really drew me and has continued to pull me deeper with the bees and kind of be this golden thread that keeps me, is the spiritual nature of them, and the
Mm-hmm.
spiritual traditions around bee tending. And that bee tending is, when we look at the history of it, beekeeping was an intersection of spirituality and medicine
Yeah.
and art and philosophy. And it wasn't just about pollination and honey.
Right.
And so we have to, like, yeah, there needs to be a cultural transformation to me in our understanding of bees and what they
What's
offer to
so you
us.
were saying that there's this mite and there's a split
Oh,
in the paradigm of beekeeping. Can you talk a little bit more about this mite?
yeah. So the varroa mite is a parasitic mite whose host is the honeybee colony,
Mm-hmm.
and really came on to the scene within beekeeping, I think around like the 1980s, and almost caused a lot of beekeepers to just give up.
Wow.
But, what I've been sitting with is what needed to happen at that time was honestly a massive die off.
Mm.
And then those honeybees that survived would have
Like immunity
mites,
to it.
yeah, mite
Yeah.
resistant genetics and behaviors. And that's what we're finding within these wild feral honeybee colonies. It's not that mites aren't present, mites are present. It's just that the colonies are able to deal with it. They have a strong enough
Interesting.
immune system, and they have certain behaviors that are more hygienic, so to speak. So these are behaviors that I look for in my colonies and my hives, and it's why I really only work with wild swarms and bees from my bioregion. I do not buy bees from other states or bees involved in the commercial industry. So, but yeah, that's something that I've been sitting with. And, what humans did is they didn't allow that natural process to happen. So we started to chemically treat hives with insecticides and
Mm-hmm.
harsh chemicals. And in addition to that, it's like the entire style of beekeeping, like I said, was becoming more industrial, and so we are keeping hives in more hives in condensed areas. So like hundreds and hundreds of hives, in a small area
Mm-hmm.
piled together in these boxes. And one thing I'm really passionate about, and like, it's just like, yeah, there's so many different, the very nest structure. So it's like
Yeah.
this kind of created this cocktail, this perfect cocktail for this mite to just take hold.
Right.
And so now I think we're kind of in this vicious cycle, and a lot of what, more natural beekeepers are doing. And there's, folks in all different sides of the spectrum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this kind of looking at how to, because one of the things that we were doing when we were taking over the reproductive process of honeybees and quite literally like artificially inseminating queens ourselves is selecting for genetics that humans want, that are human serving, like honey producing docile bees that maybe don't propolis their hive as much, like these different things that are more human centric. And so what we've, I think, kind of created is, a lot of our, more managed honeybee colonies don't necessarily have as much of those mite resistant behaviors and genetics.
Right. Right. And on top of that, using fungicides, insecticides, that puts an immune suppression onto the bees themselves. But now you're talking about selective breeding for traits that are more amenable to what our human wants. We don't want the bees to sting us. We want more honey. And something I learned in school, I use propolis quite a bit in my private practice. I treat a lot of gut
Yeah.
issues. And when I talked with you, you were like, oh no, propolis, like from a good, productive, healthy hive, is actually a very abundant resource. And so I was always like, I got to be cautious about the amount I use it, but it works super well. And in commercial colonies, there's much less propolis production than there are in feral hives, which is very curious. Do you have a suspicion for this?
So there's a few different things. So one, so I could break down all the different ways that I am drawn to looking at a tree nest and
Yeah.
applying that to keeping and even designing manageable hives based on that. So when you
Mm-hmm.
look at a tree nest, like a tree nest, one, the insulation value is way more than these, under 1 inch boxes that we put bees in. When you look at
Right.
a tree, 4 to 5 inches of bark, outer bark, inner bark, it's they're protected. And
Yeah.
also, what is the inside of a tree? It's not smooth and straight. It's ribbed, it's rough, it's bridged. There's knots. There's all these different
Mm-hmm.
crevices. The bees are much more able to live within an envelope of propolis within the tree nest.
I see.
Right? And so the propolis is a really integral a part of the hive's immune system. They collect it from tree resins from different species of trees that produce resins. So
Mm-hmm.
like a lot of our cottonwoods and aspens and evergreens, depending on what bioregion they're in, they'll connect with those trees. And it's an envelope of protection. It's a very,
Mm-hmm.
I love that you work with it in your practice. I work with it within my own as well. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a really beautiful medicine. And I actually just had a cottonwood tree nest of honeybees that I rescued last year, and they didn't overwinter this year. So I opened up the nest, and there's like so much propolis.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
it was insane. And so there is a difference. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I just think, and also when hives are being overly managed, you're constantly going in and breaking that propolis seal as well.
Mm.
So there's this delicate balance. And but if I was keeping bees in a commercial way and I was involved in honey production and commercial pollination, I wouldn't be able to keep the bees in the way that I do.
For sure. And right, I'm hearing you say, like, hey, we've got to integrate some of these practices regardless of how deep you are into the industry.
Mm.
And a little bit, and I say this to my patients, a penny's more than no penny. Like a little bit is a lot. And like that's an important thing for us to keep in mind. So this is something that's really curious to me. Places where humans are more likely to get sick are like dormitories and military barracks, like places where we're all kind of like in a confined, squeezed place. And you're saying, hey, like this tree nest that was in a cottonwood, which I'm imagining is probably the only nest for area around it, they were able to gather enough resins from the trees in their vicinity that they can, protect the nest and keep it a little more antimicrobial. Propolis is potent, and to simplify herbs or herbal extracts down into just like one piece, but it makes it a little more understandable to people. Very antimicrobial, very protective for the nest. Do you think that has something to do with it, like the fact that there's one hive in an area rather than like dozens and dozens of hives kind of all like intermingled?
Yeah. Yeah, so and this is something that Thomas Seeley talks about in his book. So he wrote a book called The Lives of Bees, and he really breaks down, like, it's incredible, like the thermodynamics
Mm.
of tree nests. Like he really goes in depth and basically creates preferences. And he also wrote another book called The Honeybee Democracy, where he studied really in depth the decision making process of the hive when they're deciding on a new home.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's such a beautiful thing to study and really dive into when you're thinking about how to create habitat for honeybees that really truly serves them. Is what are they choosing? You
Mm-hmm.
know, from the cavity size to the size of entrances to how high up from the ground, like all of these different things. And yeah, what he found is, yeah, nests higher up, like 10 to 15 feet in trees, are better for them. They're way more protected from bugs and pests and bears, predators. And so he found that, and then smaller entrances. So
Mm-hmm.
you'll often see with the Langstroth hive these big landing boards that are just open and they're like close to the ground, and there's 50 to 100 hives compiled into a yard. And yeah, it is a breeding ground for disease, absolutely. And when you're looking at hives in the wild, they're not that confined together. And yeah, so all these different aspects of tree nests and how honeybees live in the wild. And yeah, it's really, really cool, I think, about the symbiotic relationships that they have with other insects. So something
Mm.
that I like discovered in probably the last 5 years, I it's more like more there's a lot more, I feel, research and understanding of natural beekeeping in Europe,
Sure.
or these practices. But there's in Germany, beekeepers were finding that there's a scorpion that lives symbiotically with the honeybees and
Oh.
eats the mites, but it really only
Aha.
exists in tree nests. And
Oh.
so it's, or like wild nests. And it's just interesting because the wax moth, which is something that's seen as a pest within beekeeping in the wild, it's the wax moths that come in and clear out the hive after a hive has collapsed, and then a new colony can merge in. So there
I
is
see.
this natural cycle that happens in the wild. And I think it's just important to understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's like, I see that and I'm like, nature always does have an answer. But how do we really integrate this?
Yeah.
It's
Something and I'm suspecting that you got this bit or maybe from your own experience too, the swarming. What is the purpose of bees swarming, of honeybees swarming?
mm. So swarming happens every spring, and it's the colony reproducing itself as a whole being. So that the honeybee colony does that on a micro level, right? With the queen, she's laying, in peak season like spring summer, she's laying upwards of 2,000 eggs a day,
Wow.
right? And so there's this constant cycle of regeneration and new life and death coming through the hive. And in the springtime, it's the colony doing that as one whole being. And it's, and this is how I like to get my new colonies. And there's also things to consider with swarming if you're in a place that's viable for swarming, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I would say that places, if I, as a beekeeper, as a bee tender, if you're on private property that has, plenty of trees, that's a great place to set up swarm traps and work with swarming. And if you're not someone like that and you're in an urban area, you might want to split hives. And so that's another way that us beekeepers get colonies. And those are my two favorite ways to basically grow my apiaries and get new
Uh-huh.
colonies each year. So or catch swarms from, I get calls, or that as well, beyond my own just hives. So it's a really beautiful process. It's I think a really important process. And it's also a challenging process to allow happen in the modern age. And because you have a lot of people in urban areas, and there's a lot more awareness of
Sure.
swarms. But at least when I was getting started here in Colorado on the Front Range, about 10 years ago now, it was much more likely for swarms to kind of be sprayed on the spot, or just not as much awareness. And I have seen that shift quite a bit. But yeah, so in that process, the old queen will leave with a portion of the bees.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is for them to go establish a new colony somewhere else. And
I
so they'll
see.
usually cluster on a nearby tree or structure near the hive. And at that time, the they're sending out scouts. The scouts are going out and they're looking for a new home.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the process that Thomas Seeley really studied deeply is like, what are they looking for in a new home? And he wrote that book, Honeybee Democracy, which is an incredible book on that process. And from the mother hive that those bees just swarmed, a new queen will emerge.
Mm-hmm.
And she's what's called a virgin queen.
I see.
And so she's unmated. So what she needs to do is take her mating flight.
I see.
And so she will fly to what's called a drone congregation area, and she will fly up to the sun, and about 10 to 15 drones, which are male bees, the ones that reproduce with the female or the
Mm-hmm.
queen, because the sisters or the workers, they call the they're called worker bees. I call them sisters. It just feels more in alignment and kind of getting out of this industrial mindset.
Mm-hmm.
But so she will mate with the queen will mate with 10 to 15 drones within that process, and they all die in that process also. And she has in her abdomen what's called a spermatheca, so it's a part of her anatomy that will store all of that sperm. And she'll use that throughout her lifetime to fertilize eggs to become sisters.
I
And if
see.
she, yeah, so this yeah, so this is that it's a process and it's a beautiful process. And when you think about her mating with 10 to 15 drones in her bioregion, she's getting all of that genetic information, right?
Mm-hmm.
On how to thrive within that particular bioregion. So that's just explaining this kind of, yeah, this really important process, this reproductive process. That allows honeybees in particular, to, yeah, become adapted to the bioregions in which they're in. And yeah, and Rudolf Steiner also talked about this process a lot. And yeah, kind of also the sacredness of it, because the queen spends most of her life in the darkness, right?
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't really leave the hive. She's, in the brood comb laying eggs. That's her time to meet the light, to meet the sun. And he talked about something about the sun activating her vitality and her fertility.
Mm.
And that's just something that I've always sat with. And so when we're taking, like when I was learning beekeeping and learning that the common practice that I was finding within, the dominant paradigm or commercial beekeeping was to clip the wings off of a queen bee and artificially inseminate her. I was like,
Whoa.
what?
That's
it just
crazy.
didn't, it just didn't like it really hurt me like a lot and really discouraged me as a young woman wanting to study this path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there must be a better way. And I know in my medicine, in
Mhm.
naturopathic medicine, like people say, oh, traditional medicine in reference to conventional medicine, but like the dominant paradigm of beekeeping, the dominant form of medicine in the United States has only been around 100 and some years, and
Mhm.
that's it. Like
Mhm.
before that, it was arsenic and mercury and bloodletting, which bloodletting does have a place, but like that was how conventional medicine was. And I'm not saying conventional medicine doesn't have a place, because it certainly does. But when people call it traditional medicine, that really like kind of chaps me a little bit. And
Mhm.
I found some of the other beekeepers I've spoken with, they're like, oh yeah, traditional beekeeping in reference to commercial beekeeping. And like you're saying, hey, like there's a whole robust history, and reading on your substack, like you go back and you talk about like the ancient the deities that were surrounding beekeeping, and there's like a huge femininity, which totally makes sense, right? Like the queen, the worker bees, the sister bees, which totally makes more sense to me as well. Again, like moving away from like industrialization and capitalism, which is a larger conversation, but time and a place for everything.
Yeah.
Like bringing back the femininity, the matriarchalness to beekeeping keeps them safer. And I was just listening to a friend of mine who was we were catching up, and she was like, oh yeah, my friend has bees and they were swarming and they were trying to catch them. And it sounds like there's been a lot of fear around bees swarming. It's like, oh, the queen's going to leave, we have to catch her and make her not leave. Is that why they want the bees to get their, or the queens to get their wings clipped?
Yeah. So, yeah, I'll just say I feel in the world of beekeeping, I'm a bit of an outlaw.
Sure.
And I've accepted that. And I've been called irresponsible and, a lot of different things for what I'm doing. And yeah, and it's also, I'm just seeing the root cause. I'm seeing, what needs to be done. And I'm also, I don't have more than 6 hives at a time.
Right.
I'm keeping bees in a really, it's so funny to me because one of my, teachers and mentors, who's another fabulous beekeeper, she brought up that, one of the two questions we get asked most as beekeepers is how many hives do you have and how much honey or can I get some honey? And it's as those are the standards of success within beekeeping.
Right.
And that's what we're up against. And that's what I've been up against in the style of bee tending that I do is these standards of capitalism being placed upon me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really unfortunate because what if the success of beekeeping was more about, your stewardship and, how you treat the bees
Yeah.
and also a balance between native pollinators and honeybees, because that is a really big issue. And I get a lot of backlash for trying to protect honeybees from from the side of
The
the
natives.
common.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, that's really challenging because the style of bee tending that I do is I know it's about balance and it's about really storing and protecting the wild honeybees that are already here
Mm-hmm.
and not and the tree nests and the smaller hives that I do are like 10 to 15% the size of these big Langstroth hives.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I manage my colonies in a way that has the greater ecology in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, yeah, and so it's very, very interesting. And yeah, it's not traditional beekeeping, because when you look at traditional beekeeping, there was always a spiritual aspect. In the ancient world and in Egypt and Greece, it was the priests, it was the priestesses who were the bee tenders, and it was nuns and monks. And, even, in the early, history of the United States, it was, people bringing their folk traditions from Europe here. And it was beautiful and it was rooted in relationship and I think animism as well and animate practices
Mm-hmm.
and the understanding that once again the bees provide more to us than just these physical medicines. They
Yeah.
were seen as spiritual messengers between the worlds.
Mm-hmm.
There's very intimate practice that I've had for many, many years that has helped me, which is called telling the bees. And it comes from Europe and the folk traditions of my ancestors. And it was practiced that if you were a beekeeper, you had hives that if there was a birth and death in the family, you would tell the hives, you would tell the
I see.
bees.
Sure.
And so there's this beautiful relationship of, yeah, just the spiritual understanding of bees in a more yeah, I believe traditional way
Yeah.
than the
Yeah. I'll
industrial.
I'll correct people too, and like I'll be correcting people until the last breath I take, I'm sure. Um. So okay, we get pushback from people that are protecting native pollinators, but here this is the crux of the issue. We have monoculture farming primarily in the United States, and there's pros and cons to that, right? Like most of the almonds in the world are produced over in California, and to go and parse that out and make it be a more biodiverse, like throw some other like apricots and plums and peaches and some other things in there to kind of diversify it, just to make it less monoculture, would be more helpful to the native pollinators. And maybe we wouldn't have so much like concern of like, oh, we got, I don't know what kind of diseases almonds get, but we got some kind of almond disease and now just take out our entire crop.
Mhm.
Or it killed all the bees and we don't have any bees this season to pollinate. And I don't think people realize how much of our food that we consume, it's like some insane percentage, are primarily pollinated by honeybees, not even
Yeah, 75,
pollinators. 75%,
75
exactly. Like
food
that's,
supply.
we have no more honeybees, we have no more food to eat as humans. And so like this is the crux of the issue. We need to increase our biodiversity and we need to
Yeah.
have less monoculture farms and ranches so that we can actually start changing this. And from talking with other people, like there was a gentleman I spoke with a couple years ago, Bob Baxley, who's in Hotchkiss. It took 3 seasons for him of intensive grazing on his small acreage to change how he did flood irrigation. 3 seasons isn't that long. End of the day.
No. Oh, I love, yeah, I love that you say that. I'm doing a project on my land here, and I'm really sitting with that process of going slow
Yeah.
and listening to the land, and yeah, and like I said, it's a spectrum between what folks are doing in industrial agriculture and like, gosh, yeah, can we just integrate some practices like where you're growing row crops of, native flora or wildflowers or cover
Mm-hmm.
crops or just something.
Yeah.
Right. But no one's willing to change anything. And and at least from the top down,
People are
right?
scared of change. It's really what it comes to. I mean, even in my practice, it's like, if I have them drinking more water, well, I don't want to drink more water because I don't want to have to pee more. Okay, well, you need to pee more. Like, you're dehydrated. You're at risk of developing chronic kidney disease because you're not hydrating your body enough. Well, I don't really want to get up and go pee more. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't know that I'm the best person for you because there's not a drug that's going to fix this problem. We become like this. We need fast hit dopamine, solve our problems right now today, and not wanting to take this. And what's the saying? Like, slow is fast, fast is smooth. Like, slow is the right pace, and it's the pace of nature. Like, nature doesn't have the luxury of rushing, and it works
No.
out. It seems to work out pretty good.
It works out so good. And yeah, it's these are the things I work with, not only with in beekeeping, but I'm also an herbalist, right? And it's, getting people to take herbs, it's and realizing it's a whole shift of your entire relationship to life. And
Mm-hmm.
coming back to, that it's like the earth doesn't really need healing, we do. It's like we need a
Mm-hmm.
cultural transformation
We do.
because we're lost and we're disconnected, and to me, it's when I look at all these issues, it's and even like the honeybees and the native pollinators and commercial beekeeping versus natural beekeeping, all these different things. It's once again, it's black white, as if that's how things work. It's not, and nature is
No.
not black. It is a spectrum always. And yeah, we're just in this really interesting place. But it always comes back to me as a lack of relationship. And a lot of us here in the United States, that were brought from Europe, we don't have a cultural lineage. We're not connected to our lineages and our traditions that allow
Yeah.
us and give us the container and the guidance and the knowledge
Mm-hmm.
to be in right relationship. So we're lost, and I think that that's a really important, that feels like a root issue here, is
It
that a
is.
lot of us here in the United States are cultural orphans.
Mm-hmm.
And that lack of culture, that lack of tradition that teaches us how to be in relationship with the land in which we're living is, I think, cause, and the fact that we've displaced the people that were here and in a relationship.
Right.
It's, I think, a really big issue, and there needs to be a cultural transformation. And it's it's a lot for
It's a lot,
sure.
but it starts
But
with
I think
small practices, like you said, like the farmers,
100%.
these monoculture corn growers that are in my area. What if they did plant just like a few rows of interspersed native flowers in between some of their
Yeah.
big swaths? How big of a difference would that make in the like worm that they're having in the corn? I don't know. I haven't looked, I haven't seen data, but I'm not seeing them do that in the fields that I drive past on the highway. So could be a relatively, and I'm speaking from inexperience, but could be a relatively inexpensive process to add into the field and make that big of a difference. It really, like, these little things make a big difference. Drink more water.
They make the difference. And just, yeah, I'm really passionate about soil fertility.
Yeah.
And, and my like focuses are soil fertility and pollinator habitat. And
Mm-hmm.
I grow predominantly medicine, so that's my focus, which makes things also easier in a lot of ways. I'm not
Sure.
growing a lot of food. But but yeah, when I was 27, I accidentally drove through the almond orchards in California. I say accidentally because it felt very like it felt like the bees brought me there
Sure.
to really be there. And I walked the orchards for some hours and just cried and felt the land and the soil and just saw the barrenness. I felt it in
Yeah.
my own body. I let myself feel that and experience that because I think that it's important to, yeah, for me, it's, yeah, there's it's just like it's not a sustainable system. It's
It's
not a
not.
sustainable system, and we've roped the honeybees in as our like as some sort of playing chip within it, our the workforce of industrial agriculture, quite literally,
Yeah.
and it's killing the very thing on which it depends. And it's
Mhm.
so heartbreaking because it's what I see is, yeah, I don't see root causes continuing to be addressed. It's like how I don't even. It's yeah, it's an unfortunate situation, and that's why supporting local food economies, regenerative agriculture, starting with your community, starting
Yeah.
to create those kind of local hubs, bioregional hubs where people are working with the land in a regenerative way, and you're supporting those. That's what we need to be focusing on because yeah, we have to stop giving our money to that system.
That would be ideal. Yeah. And,
That's the
we
idea.
think, I think about accessibility. And one thing I always like to bring up on my podcast is, hey, if you do have EBT food stamps, a lot of farmers will take double up bucks. I know
Oh
farm
yeah.
runners here in our local area, they do. And the farmers markets in most places in Colorado, I think it's $20. You buy $20 on food stamps, you get $20 double up back. So it's like doubling your money. And then you get access to good local produce. And I know people are concerned about the pesticides and whatnot, but again, we're supporting local farmers, and there are definitely better farmers than other farmers in the area, but again, you're meeting a farmer hand to hand, and you're getting to shake their hand and say thank you for producing the food that is nourishing my system. And the food that's grown here in Colorado, bioregional food, herbalism, honey, all of it is much more adapted to our body and what we need because we're exposed to the same conditions: the rain, lack of rain, the wind, the hot arid conditions, right? Like those things have an effect on the soil fertility. And one farm I always like to bring up in our area is Abundant Life. They do a fantastic job, and I haven't had the owner of the farm on here yet, but she is the most diverse and largest small farm in the area. And it's pretty
Wow.
impressive what she can do. And her melons are off the charts delicious. Like I'll never be able to buy one from the grocery store again. And like that's the value, in my opinion, of like working with local farmers is food. I wonder how many people don't like vegetables because they taste yucky because they're sitting at the grocery store for 3, 6, 8, I don't even know, 8 weeks before they get into our house, and then they rot in our drawer because we forgot to use them because we don't use vegetables very often because they don't taste good.
Yeah.
Like fresh produce tastes so much better and it's so flavorful.
It's so, yeah. I mean, there's so many reasons to support,
Yeah.
that. And it's when you look at the exploitation of farm workers, right,
Oh my
as
gosh,
well,
yeah.
and it's like, why would we want to support not only with our food, what we're putting in our bodies? Why would we want to not only support the exploitation of the land, but like the exploitation of people?
Yeah.
And that's not okay. And that's not, we don't want to be putting that in our bodies, right?
Mhm.
And I totally agree with you and supporting, gosh, it's like one of the most important things. And I also see that within pollinator health and honeybee health as well.
It's all
Is
connected.
all so connected. And, with honeybees in particular, it's, the food and the crops that are grown, likely in agriculture, like fruit orchards and vegetable farms, those are providing a large amount of pollen and nectar for honeybees. And so when
Mhm.
that's done in a regenerative way, it's supporting them. And then, of course, there's the whole other question of how do we support our native pollinators? And that's so unbelievably important to be doing right now and restoring
Yeah.
native pollinator habitat. And so there's a balance, and it comes back to just relationship. It really does, and restoring right relationship with how we grow things and how we, yeah, nourish our bodies.
Are you familiar
Which
with Tom Brown Jr.?
I'm not.
So there was a book. He was a gentleman that grew up on the East Coast, and I'm forgetting some of the details, but one of the books I read from him was called The Scout, and there was one of his chapters, and like it still sits with me. And I read this book like I don't know, 15 years ago or something, and he was talking about right relationship with the land, and he and a friend ended up getting mentored by a native elder in his time supposedly, and there's some some people got some negative things to say about him, but regardless, this chapter he talks about the earth bleeding and the like the barrenness that you've discussed. And I've had this feeling too of like seeing entire swaths of land just like cut down. And like it's like that scene from Simba where he's his dad is telling him like, oh, we don't go there, like that's at the no
Yeah.
man's land, is like, and that emptiness we feel to our core if we're tuned in. And so that's an interesting book if you're curious in that. And then have you read Elliot Cohen's book Spiritual Ecology?
Uh, is that the one that breaks down Steiner's viewpoint a little bit?
It might. I haven't
Uh,
read any of Steiner's work, although it's been very like tangential into my work in a number of ways. But he talks about the anima and the animus and like these things that like that animate us. Like, how do you tell the difference between a dead animal and a live animal? Like, there's this thing that like animates us. And like,
Yeah.
we were just driving through. Up by Silverjack, and you could see areas where the big sagebrush was looking so good, so vibrant, and so healthy. And just on the other side of the road, it didn't look as good. And how
Yeah.
can you tell the difference? Like, there's a vibrancy and a vitality in the leaves of the plant versus kind of like this dryness that like the plant's struggling. You just get a sense for it. Anybody that's spent much time outside can kind of get a sense for it. But that book was another one that was pretty profound and like just tuning in to the natural rhythms of the environment.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It's rooted in our health is rooted in the health of the land around us.
Healthy soil,
Right.
healthy humans, and when we don't, I mean, look at the chronic disease epidemic. Like it's pretty severe right now.
So severe. It's so severe. And yeah, and it's so interesting in my work, and I'm sure you can kind of relate. It's, people can take all the supplements and do all the herbs and do all the practices, but it's if there's this disconnect still that, if and it just takes time, I feel like I'm still coming into it, but realizing that we are nature,
Mm-hmm.
and really feeling that relationship, feeling that in your body, being able to, yeah, look at the barren earth and feel that in your body and just feel like that's not right.
Yeah.
And to feel that relationship with nature is so important. And for me, it's until people start to come into relationship with the plants, that's when the healing really starts to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
uh, and I think that's the way that we're supposed to work with the natural world, is in that kind of communion, that
Mm-hmm.
it's not what can I get from you, what can you give me. It's relationship, it's
Yeah.
reciprocal. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what's lacking so much, and that's what I see has happened with the honeybees. And it's really unfortunate because, yeah, they to me are so sacred,
Yeah.
and
The way
the
the
bees
way
are so sacred.
the way that bees express, oh, we found like a really good like source of nectar, like they will then do like a little dance to tell their sisters, come here,
Mhm.
this is the coordinates, and they will do it in a very synchronistic way. Do you know much about that process?
Oh, absolutely.
Can you
Yeah.
speak to that a little bit, because I don't think a lot of people really understand that like bees are a huge community and they have such a tight social network.
Yeah, I mean, the bees that are and the honeybee hive is one of the most, fascinating phenomenons in nature, and has quite literally mystified humans for so long. The not just and like honey itself, that's like a whole other talk,
For
with just the
sure.
history of honey. And I think the way that honey uh, shaped and transformed the consciousness of humans through, yeah, like, I mean, mead was our first alcoholic beverage, one of the first things to really alter states of
Mm-hmm.
mind. Um, but yeah, just this deep, I kind of forgot just where I was going for a second.
The dance
There's
of
so
where like there's a good
Yeah,
honey
for
or
lack of
good
it.
nectar source.
Thank you so much. There's so many threads with bees, and it's good to, yeah, stay on one sometimes. But so the waggle dance is, I actually call it the dance. It's like the dance of infinity too, because I
Mm-hmm.
love that symbol so much. And so, yeah, when a sister bee has found an abundant source of pollen, nectar, she'll come back to the hive, and she'll dance on the comb in the shape of a figure eight, and she'll like waggle in different directions, and she's giving exact GPS coordinates to that particular source of pollen or nectar. And so that's just one of the ways that the hive communicates. The hive also communicates a lot through scent and pheromones and sound and vibration as well. And yeah, and so those are the ways in which the hive communicates. And yeah, and really thinking about the hive as not a box of insects, but as a super organism, I think is
Mm-hmm.
really important to understand. And the hive mind is just an incredibly powerful thing to witness in action. And I feel like I especially see that in certain parts of swarm season. But when they're kind of like all following the queen, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just so incredible to witness. And yeah, in the ancient world, there was a lot more of a mystical understanding of the bee, and the bee inspired a lot of mysticism in the ancient world, and the building of temples and the construction of temples, and a lot was seen within the hive.
Mm-hmm.
A lot was inspired from the hive. For example, yeah, even just like the medicines of the hive were really integral in the mummification process in Egypt, and
Yeah.
there's just references to bees throughout these ancient civilizations, which I think is just noteworthy.
Yeah, I can't remember whose temple they found like 2,000 old honey, but it was perfectly edible honey still. Like
Yeah.
honey is powerful medicine. It's good medicine, and when it's not overly processed, and again, like you've got to be mindful of like who you get your honey from and making sure they're not using insecticides and herbicides and, or excuse me, fungicides that are then you're going to be consuming as the person that's buying the honey from this individual.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's really just important to, yeah, and the whole process, the whole understanding of the medicines of the hive is a big topic as well, and
Mm-hmm.
what to ethically sourcing those. But I think coming back to a deeper understanding of honey is like not just a sweetener, right? It's a sacrament, and it is an incredible medicine. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it's also a massive labor of love.
Mm-hmm.
One sister bee will make a twelfth of a teaspoon of honey in her entire lifetime, and it takes the bees have to fly 90,000 miles to
Wow.
create 1 pound of honey. And 1 pound of honey is, I think it's like, I'm trying to remember all the specific statistics, but I think it's like takes like millions of flowers, over 2 million flowers, to create a
Wow.
single pound of honey. And so really understanding the amount of, you know, effort that goes into the creation of this substance. And
Mm-hmm.
that first and foremost is food for the bees. They don't make honey for us. And I think that that's an important thing to understand.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and that honey is just an incredible gift and such an incredible medicine too.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's a preservative. It lasts forever, and even when it goes bad, like it would just be water getting into the honey. And what happens is the process of fermentation. It ferments into alcohol or mead. And if mead goes bad, it just becomes vinegar, basically. So it's
So
it's
it's
a
not.
really yeah, so
Yeah, transformation. Mm-hmm.
it's a constant alchemical process. And I think of the bees as nature's alchemists. And the substances that they create are, to me, are just so yeah, incredible in the way that they just continue to transform into something higher and higher.
Is there anything else you want to leave our listeners with today?
Ooh. I think yeah, I would love to talk about the best ways to support bees right
Mm,
now, because I think that there was definitely a misconception for a while there that to save the bees was to become a beekeeper. And so you had a lot of people jumping into the field of beekeeping. And I don't want to discourage people from keeping bees at all.
yeah.
I think I think bees offer so much to us as humans. I just want to encourage people to take their time if they're feeling called to work with the bees, to really do their research into the issues, and the complexities of this path, especially in the modern age. We're not only dealing with a rapidly changing, society and political system, but also climate as well. And there's deep ecological considerations to be tending, I believe, right now that I just want people to sit with.
Mm-hmm.
before they jump in. And, by just jumping in and then buying all these packages of bees from commercial beekeepers, we could be causing more harm than good. So, to, yeah, I teach beekeeping as an initiation, as a spiritual practice. It's not a hobby,
Yeah.
to me, and that's just my approach. And that the best thing that we can be doing to supporting all of our bees and native pollinators is to grow habitat for them. And so taking the time to educate yourself on what that looks like. And I'll just say that one of the great organizations and resources is Xerces Society. So that's Xerces. They are a large nonprofit that does invertebrate conservation, and they have a massive amount of resources on pollinator conservation and growing native pollinator habitat.
Awesome.
Uh, and so growing healthy gardens from seed, building fertility in the soil. It's really easy to grow native flora,
Mm-hmm.
incredibly easy.
Right. It's
uh,
native, so it wants to be here.
it wants to be here, but there is a level, I think, of land restoration that needs to happen. And I'm doing that on my property up here to really build the fertility in the soil so those plants can thrive over
Mm-hmm.
more invasive plants. So, yeah, but the biggest thing is to really be cultivating habitat for the bees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that to just kind of redirect the direction that, saving the bees isn't everyone becoming a beekeeper. It's we need to support all of our pollinators. And I really think that when we create a world that's healthy for our pollinators, it's healthy for everybody. And it's a
Yeah.
world of beauty because it just means growing more flowers.
Exactly.
And yeah, and also that, I think the bees offer a really important wisdom for these times, and bringing people together. And this is a common thread and myth around the world, is bees being kind of this symbol of unity and community and working together for the greater good of all, right? And
Mm-hmm.
service to creation and service to the web of life and the interconnectedness of all things. And so may we follow their wisdom in these
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, I love that. And bringing back community to and unity together. The bees bring us together in many ways. Um, while I'm not a deep beekeeper, I am restoring some of my property to include native habitat so that we do have better pollinators and more native birds that are also pollinators. And then, come on, who doesn't love beautiful flowers in the first morning light? Like, it's just a pleasure. Courtney, thank you so much for chatting with me today about the deeper complexities of beekeeping that are oftentimes forgotten about by the commercial beekeepers, and we just don't know. And it's not to pit anybody against each other. It's just like we all have our areas of where we are deeply and passionately called, and to share our knowing with our community so that we can, when we know more, we do better. And so thank you so much for tuning in this week. And Courtney, one last thing, if people want to get in touch with you, where's the best place to get in touch?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I'm based in Colorado, just west of Boulder and in the mountains. My business is Honeybee Herbals. So I'm an herbalist and a beekeeper. I do mentorship work and yeah, make medicines, teach a lot of classes and so on and so forth. So you can find me at honeybeeherbals.co. That's my website. And you can also find me on Instagram, Honeybee Herbals, Facebook. Not as active on Facebook, and I also have a Substack called Honey and Venom, which is a writing publication where I share, yeah, a little bit more about the deeper threads of my work.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.